The director of this movie was forced to cast an actress he didn't want, and 34 years later he's still blaming it for ruining the film. Wuthering Heights has to be the most cursed movie ever made. Here are 15 insane facts that prove it. Peter Kosminski was in his early 30s when he decided to adapt Wuthering Heights as his first feature film. He'd only ever made one drama before, and that was for TV. Years later, he admitted that choosing Wuthering Heights for his debut was the biggest mistake of my life. He said he repented at great leisure over trying to tackle something that massive and layered when he had basically no experience. But the mistake wasn't just picking a difficult book. The real problem started with casting. Paramount wanted Juliette Binoche as Catherine Earnshaw. Kosminski didn't. He had someone else in mind, but the studio overruled him, and Kosminski knew exactly why it wouldn't work. You can't cast a French person as Cathy and expect British to like it. He knew that going in. He said later that he had less artistic control on Wuthering Heights than on anything he'd made before or since, right down to the casting of the female lead. But he was young, he had no leverage, and he'd been raised not to be a quitter. So he took the job anyway. I was given that casting, and I knew that the British public would always struggle to accept a French actress playing Cathy Earnshaw, and I should have walked away. But I was brought up not to be a quitter. Originally, Paramount had been talking to Daniel Day-Lewis and Isabella Gianni for the two leads. Then Day-Lewis went off to do 2 pictures for Fox, and that whole plan fell apart. Somehow they ended up with Binoche, and Kosminski got stuck with a casting decision he didn't want and couldn't change. To Kosminski's credit, he tried everything to make it work. He gave Binoche this really unconventional task. She had to play both Catherine Earnshaw and her grown daughter Catherine Linton. So the same actress portraying mother and daughter, which meant subtle changes in voice and appearance throughout the film. Binoche said it was extremely challenging, and on top of that, she had to learn a Yorkshire accent. In 6 weeks. She's French, had never done a British accent before, and now she's got a month and a half to nail a specific regional dialect. So she moved to Yorkshire about 6 weeks before filming started and just immersed herself in it, working with dialect coaches constantly. It was an insane amount of pressure to put on any actor, let alone someone the director didn't even want in the role. When the movie came out, you could hear the struggle in every line. It wasn't bad acting. She's a great actress. It was just the wrong casting from the start. Sinead O'Connor shows up in this movie playing Emily Bronte. Not credited, just a few scenes at the beginning and end near a cabin. The producers wanted to show Emily's spirit, how she imagined the book. So they cast a musician to play the writer. The weird part is, O'Connor had already recorded Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights, the song Bush wrote about the novel in the 70s. So O'Connor sang about the book, then played the woman who wrote it. This crossover between the singer and the writer. Most people didn't notice because she wasn't credited and the scenes were brief. This was being positioned as a prestige production, so everybody wanted in. Christopher Eccleston auditioned for Heathcliff. He wrote about it in his memoir decades later. Uma Thurman came in for Catherine. Kosminski ended up seeing 100 actors for Heathcliff and 200 actresses for Catherine. That's 300 auditions. And at the end of all that, he found Ralph Fiennes. Wuthering Heights was Ralph Fiennes' first movie. Kosminski saw 100 actors before casting him as Heathcliff, and later said Fiennes was the greatest actor of his generation. He's punctilious, thorough, and has an ability to show intensity through small movements, which is perfect for film acting. He generates all the power you want without straying into melodrama. Steven Spielberg was in pre-production on Schindler's List and needed someone to play the Nazi concentration camp officer. He watched Wuthering Heights and cast Fiennes. He later said what caught his attention was Fiennes' dark sexuality as Heathcliff. Watching him in a period romance, he saw the guy who should play one of the most brutal villains in cinema. Fiennes shot Schindler's List before Wuthering Heights even came out in America. The U.S. release got delayed until after Schindler's List, so most Americans thought that was his debut. He basically auditioned for the role of his career without knowing it. Wuthering Heights had a $9 million budget, which wasn't much even back then, so they decided to stack the crew with top British talent to make it work. James Acheson came on for costumes. The guy had won an Oscar and worked with Bernardo Bertolucci all the time. Brian Morris handled production design right after finishing The Last Boy Scout. Mike Southen shot it fresh off Jodie Foster's directorial debut Little Man Tate. Mary Selway produced, and this was actually her first time in that role. But she'd cast 90 movies before this: Raiders of the Lost Ark, Return of the Jedi, Alien. She knew everyone worth knowing. Eileen Maisel from Paramount said they were bringing in the best British craftspeople to prove you could make something extraordinary for $9 million. That was the whole strategy. Elite talent, tiny budget. With all that talent on screen and behind the camera, you'd think the movie would have been huge. It wasn't. The film got released in Europe first and completely tanked. One critic was so disgusted they called it a drone, depressing and exhaustively revolting excuse for entertainment. After that disaster, Paramount didn't even bother giving it a wide release in the United States. All those Oscar winners and legendary crew members, all that careful planning, and most people never got to see it in theaters. Paramount wanted to call the movie Wuthering Heights. Simple title for a classic book. Except Samuel Goldwyn Company owned the rights to those two words from their 1939 film. They threatened to sue, and the Motion Picture Association sided with them. So Paramount had to release it as Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and every single time they dropped the author's name on a poster, in an ad, anywhere, Goldwyn was legally allowed to fine them $2,500. $2,500 per violation for not writing Emily Bronte's in front of a title. That's how one studio managed to own the name of a book that's been in the public domain for over a century. Shooting schedule was brutal. 5 days a week, long hours. Juliette Binoche had no time to cook, run errands, take care of anything. No one was helping her manage it, so Ray Fiennes started cooking for her. She talked about it years later, said it felt like heaven, someone actually taking care of her during this exhausting shoot. They stayed friends after Wuthering Heights wrapped. 4 years later, they made The English Patient together. Then in 2024, 32 years after cooking dinner on a failed period drama, they reunited for The Return. The film's composer was Ryuichi Sakamoto, serious musician, serious talent behind The Last Emperor and a bunch of other Oscar-winning films. He scored the whole thing. And then the film came out, got destroyed by critics, flopped at the box office everywhere except Japan, where it actually found an audience. The official soundtrack album was released only in Japan. Never got a Western release. Sakamoto himself noted the film wasn't successful outside of Japan, and the decision basically reflected that, why bother releasing an album for a movie nobody went to see? International collectors have been hunting for it ever since. They filmed the Yorkshire Moor scenes on location in actual Yorkshire, which already involved dragging a whole production crew out into the wilderness. But that wasn't ambitious enough. The production also built an entirely fake stone circle on Boss Moor near Grassington just for the film. The big, sweeping moor scenes were filmed around Malham Cove, this incredible natural limestone amphitheater, a 260-foot-high cliff face just outside the village of Malham. Genuinely one of the most dramatic landscapes in England. You might actually recognize it. That same limestone pavement at Malham Cove shows up in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. So the same stretch of Yorkshire Moor that Heathcliff broods across in 1992 is the same one Harry and Hermione camp on 2 decades later. And speaking of Harry Potter, Wuthering Heights was the first major film role for Janet McTeer, who plays Nellie Dean in the film. She was a newcomer at the time. 34 years later, she's been cast as Professor McGonagall in HBO's new Harry Potter series. And there's also the role of Linton Heathcliff. the miserable boy that Kathy gets forced into marrying. That's played by Jonathan Firth, Colin Firth's brother. Jonathan was just starting out at the time. He went on to have a solid working career, though he never broke through the way his brother did. Peter Kosminski was on location in Yorkshire's second day of filming when the phone rang. It was John Goldwyn, who'd just taken over as head of production at Paramount. And what Goldwyn said was essentially, "This film never should have been made. You have your $10 million, and you will not get a single cent more." That's day 2. They haven't even gotten started yet. What makes this even stranger is who Goldwyn was. His grandfather had produced the original 1939 Wuthering Heights adaptation, the famous Laurence Olivier version. So the grandson of the man who made the definitive Wuthering Heights was now running Paramount and actively wanted nothing to do with the new one. He wasn't bluffing either. When production ran into trouble later on, Kosminski went back asking for more money. Goldwyn said no. The film got made on that original $10 million and nothing else, which for an ambitious period production with a known cast was extremely tight. The studio was never behind this film. From day 2, everyone knew it. Before Wuthering Heights, Peter Kosminski had spent a decade making documentaries. He was good at it. He had a reputation. He was comfortable. Then Paramount came calling. Everyone in his life told him not to do it. His agent, his friends, people in the industry, all of them said this was a mistake. He ignored all of them. Years later, Kosminski was pretty honest about why. He grew up obsessed with films, and suddenly here was Paramount Pictures putting him in a limousine and driving him through those famous gates on Melrose Avenue. He said it would be extraordinary if someone's head wasn't turned by that. I was being offered the opportunity to do the full story of Wuthering Heights, not just half the story. But common sense should have told me first of all that some of the promises that were being made to me would not be kept. Kosminski took the job, and he admitted afterward that he simply wasn't ready. It was only the second drama he'd ever directed. His ambition got ahead of his ability, and the film suffered for it. The fallout was serious. In his industry, he said, "You're only as good as your last film." And now his last film was Wuthering Heights. The film world closed off to him almost completely. Getting back into television was a struggle too, because the failure had followed him there as well. It took him years to recover.